Chapter 136 Reflection. On the other side of the sturdy door, there was a tiny room with stone walls and a single, narrow window that was closed with wooden shutters and draped in thick cloth. Harper had warned them not to open the windows during the night, but out here in the Tower of Dusk, no one would want to stare at the view anyway. Allowing any amount of light to seep out of the castle at night was considered to be a severe crime, so he had been pretty emphatic on that point. Of course, the gaunt young man didn't know that neither Sonny nor Cassie required light to move in the dark. They could open the windows as wide as they wanted, not that they had any reason to. Inside the room, there was a bed with a straw mattress, a flimsy chest, and a tiny desk. On the desk, there was a basin filled with water, a few strips of clean cloth, and an oil lamp. There was even a small round mirror made of polished bronze. Sonny caught a glimpse of his reflection and flinched, as though seeing a stranger. In these past 2 months, he had seen himself through the eyes of the shadow plenty of times, but it wasn't the same. He had changed a lot. His face was much sharper and angular now, the last remnants of youthful roundness chased away from it by the harsh gauntlet of the labyrinth, although Sonny never had a lot of that, to begin with. It was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes and other signs of extreme exhaustion. His black hair was longer, falling over his eyes in a dirty mess. What changed the most, however, were the eyes themselves. Deep in their dark depths, there was a glint of calm, heavy, bleak coldness that had not been there before. With a startling realization, Sonny understood that he, too, now possessed the look of a seasoned fighter. The type of calculating coldness hiding in the eyes of such men was known as the murder math in the outskirts. Hero and Nephi's had that quality, too. Only in their case, it made them seem like true warriors. Sonny, on the other hand, Sonny had the eyes of a killer. And even deeper than that, visible only to him, golden threads of Weaver's inhuman legacy glowed mysteriously in the darkness. Staring at his reflection, Sonny grinned darkly and said in a strange, hoarse voice, "Looking good, Sunless." Leaving his shadow to guard the door to Cassie's room, Sonny fell on the soft mattress, wrapped himself in a blanket, and tried to get himself to sleep. Here in the safety of the mighty castle, surrounded by hundreds of people, lying on a real bed, it was hard to believe that just a few days ago he was traveling through the cursed darkness of the deadly sea on a rickety boat, fighting terrifying monsters in the bizarre landscape of the coral labyrinth, and losing his mind piece by piece to the gluttonous hunger of an ancient soul-devouring tree. It all seemed like a feverish dream. This isn't bad. With that thought, he fell asleep. In the morning, washed and refreshed, he waited for Cassie in the hallway. Even the puppeteer's shroud, which finally got a chance to return to the Soul Sea for a decently long period of time and restore itself, looked clean and tidy once again. That poor armor had gone through enough abuse to kill a dozen sleepers, yet it still held fast, saving his life on numerous occasions. Sonny was reminded of how lucky he had been to receive it. The blind girl did not make him wait for long. Soon she came out of her room, practically glowing with loveliness and freshness. It seemed as though Cassie had done the same things as Sonny. After months spent crawling through blood and dirt in the wilderness, they finally looked and felt like humans again. "Good morning!" Sonny blinked. He had almost forgotten how stunning Cassie was. With her delicate features, bright blue eyes, and pale blonde hair, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. The blind girl had dismissed the enchanted cloak, leaving her dressed only in a light tunic, with leather sandals on her feet. She was nothing short of breathtaking. He closed his eyes and sighed. "This smells like trouble." "Good morning, Cassie." She turned her head to him and wrinkled her nose. Sonny frowned. What?" The blind girl knitted her brow. "I don't know. You smell different." He stared at her for a few moments, and then laughed. "If this is your way of saying that I used to reek, then thank you, I guess." Giggling, Cassie came closer and put her hand on his shoulder. "That's not what I meant. Anyway, let's go eat. The two of them were in a strangely good mood. Sunny guided Cassie to the main keep of the castle, following the route that Harper had explained to them the previous evening. On the way, he was careful to avoid any doors and corridors marked with the symbol of the golden serpent coiled around a white tower. His shadow was going to take a look at the forbidden areas of the fortress later, most likely. But for now, they had to keep a low profile and avoid trouble. Finding the keep was not hard, as many other sleepers were going there to partake in the breakfast too. Meals were served twice a day in the castle, once in the morning and once right before sunset. If you missed one and had no other way to procure food, you would have to remain hungry for the rest of the day. Sunny observed the sleepers with curiosity, sometimes describing them to Cassie in a low voice. The inhabitants of the castle were very different from the desperate dwellers of the outer settlement. They generally seemed healthy, or at least well-fed. The amount of armor-type memories here was also much higher, although many still wore clothes made of mundane fabrics. Almost all of them were young and beautiful, with only a couple of the people he had seen looking like they were past their early 20s. Despite that, few could compare to Cassie in terms of looks. Finally, they entered the main hall of the keep, where long wooden tables were placed to accommodate the morning crowd of hungry sleepers. Suddenly, hundreds of eyes turned to stare at Cassie and Sunny. Feeling cold shivers running down his spine, he gulped. Crap. Chapter 137 All Eyes on Me. The main hall of the mighty castle was grandiose and majestic in appearance. The gentle light of the morning sun was cascading through the tall windows and reflecting from the white marble walls, filling it with a bright radiance. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings that spanned dozens of meters, creating a regal tapestry. At the far end of the hall, a set of stairs led to a dark alcove. The back wall of the alcove had numerous small holes cut through it, and with sunlight shining through them into the deep darkness, it seemed as though a fragment of the starlit night sky was somehow locked within the castle. Beneath that light stood an empty white throne. Sunny stared at the throne for a few moments, then lowered his gaze and glanced at the several hundred people that were looking at them. Long wooden tables were placed along the length of the grand hall, with a motley crowd of sleepers sitting on crude benches behind them, busy consuming their food. There was some sort of hierarchy in how they were grouped, but Sunny couldn't understand it yet. Currently, most of them were staring in his direction. Sunny gulped. It took him a couple of seconds to realize that all these people were not, in fact, looking at him. They were all looking at Cassie, clearly startled by her loveliness. Crap. Just as he had thought, this smelled like trouble. The blind girl, meanwhile, was oblivious to the commotion her appearance had caused. Sensing the sudden tension in his muscles, she asked, "Sunny? Why did you stop?" He narrowed his eyes, gave the crowd of sleepers his most menacing scowl, and answered in a flat tone, "Just taking in the view." Then, Sunny walked over to the young women rationing the food, received 2 plates of steaming monster meat stew, and guided Cassie to a relatively empty spot at the end of one of the tables. He even got 2 cups of something that closely resembled tea. Sitting down, he put the crudely made utensils into Cassie's hand and stared at his plate. He didn't like all this attention one bit. "Look at that, Cass! They even got vegetables. I swear there's at least 2 pieces of a tomato in my stew. Or is it a carrot? What's that thing that looks like a red potato?" Sunny had only seen vegetables in the Academy's cafeteria, so he was not well versed in differentiating them. Teacher Julius had also only mentioned them in passing, since the chances of encountering a vegetable from the real world in the dream realm were not very high. To be precise, he had briefly showed Sunny pictures of the most common earth vegetables and said that if he ever was to find something that makes him think, that thing looks familiar," he should turn around and run. Cassie smelled her stew and said with a smile, "I think it's a beetroot." Sunny blinked. Never heard of it. While they were innocently chatting, he was observing the sleepers through his shadow, waiting tensely for things to go wrong. And pretty soon they did. Sonny gritted his teeth when two rough-looking young men suddenly rose from their benches and headed across the hall toward them with unpleasant excitement burning in their eyes. Here we go. Who would have thought that the thing that landed him in trouble would be Cassie's beauty, of all things? Usually, it was either his sharp tongue or his general obnoxiousness. Never, not even once, had it been his looks. Ouch. I shouldn't be jealous, right? The worst part was that the two approaching sleepers were obviously a part of Gunlog's gang. It was apparent from their armor and the fact that they carried their weapons in actual sheaths, like a pair of idiots. Memories could be freely summoned out of thin air, so the only reason to keep them visible at all times was for the sake of intimidation. He had noted that detail after meeting the castle guards yesterday. What had Harper said? If there is a misunderstanding with one of Gunlog's people, remember that these guys carry a heavy burden. Treat them with respect. In other words, swallow it. The young men approached their corner of the table with vulgar smiles. They were clearly undressing Cassie with their eyes. Sonny turned his head and looked up at them. The sleepers sitting nearby turned away with heavy looks, clearly afraid and uncomfortable. Maybe they just want to say hi. Sonny opened his mouth. Respectful, remember, be respectful, and said, "What the fuck are you degenerates staring at?" The whole hall was suddenly enveloped in silence. Once again, Sonny had found himself in the center of attention. But this time, everyone was actually staring at him instead of Cassie. I guess that's better? The few nearby sleepers who had pretended to not notice anything a few seconds earlier lowered their heads, as though trying to become smaller and disappear completely. Sonny glanced at them with disdain and turned back to the pair of young men who were currently towering above him, a dark and dangerous light dancing in their eyes. To be honest, his incendiary reaction had caught Sonny by surprise. The anger had taken the better of him for a moment, forcing the words out of his mouth. But the damage had already been done. It seemed as though his brotherly instincts were not only still alive, but also somewhat overwhelming. To hell with this. They want to see dark and dangerous? I'll show them. He glared at the two idiots, knowing that, at this point, there was no way back. Beside him, Cassie turned her head, an alarmed expression on her face. One of the idiots grinned. "Huh! We were just hoping to politely introduce ourselves to this lovely little doll, but hey, we can get acquainted with the ugly little clown first. How about it?" He glanced at the other sleeper, who was looking at Sonny with no humor in his eyes whatsoever. Cassie frowned, then said, "Why are you?" However, at that moment, the second young man took a step forward and growled, interrupting her. "What did you just say, clown? Do you know who we are? Fool, we're Gunlog's men." His hand was resting on the pommel of his sword. Sonny knew that escalating the situation was not a wise thing to do, but at this point, he didn't have a choice. Backing down now would only lead to a disaster. He knew this type of people well. The moment they felt a weakness, it was all over. They understood only two things, fear and strength. Outstretching one hand, he scowled, looked the young men right into the eyes, and said, "Congratulations. Now get lost before I make you dead men." Perhaps recognizing something in his voice, or maybe in his eyes, the sleeper who had his hand on the pommel of the sword hesitated. For a second, Sonny almost believed that his threat worked. But then the young man furtively glanced around, and his tiny hope evaporated. If they were alone, maybe the sleeper would have reconsidered his desire to antagonize Sonny any further. But with all these people watching, he couldn't show fear. Sonny failed to account for one crucial detail. All bullies were cowards, but what they feared the most was people finding out about their cowardice. Gunlog's man bared his teeth in a threatening grin. "Those are terribly big words, coming from a puny weakling like you. You know what? I think your girl needs to keep better company. Why don't we help her out by making you disappear?" Sonny smiled. "I guess I'm going to kill a couple of fools today." Cassie, meanwhile, was not happy with what was happening at all. The frown on her face deepened. I'll decide what company to keep myself. Now, please. However, they weren't listening to her. Sonny was already bracing himself for the worst-case scenario, prepared to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. But then, suddenly, a calm voice sounded from behind his back. Leave them alone, please. They are my friends. Caught by surprise, Sonny hurriedly shifted his perspective to the shadow and glanced back. Behind him, a tall and confident young man stood calmly with his hands resting at his hips. He had brown hair and a gentle, handsome face. His eyes sparkled with friendly humor. It was Castor? Chapter 138 Unexpected Reunion. Without a doubt, it was Castor, the only person Sonny had ever seen defeat Nephites in a fight, even if it was just during training. Back at the academy, Castor had been a star of their batch of sleepers. Handsome and friendly, he was not only popular, but also respected. And although it pained Sonny to admit it, that wasn't only because of his lofty status of a legacy. Even other legacies looked up to him. Many even considered him to be the true king of the rankings, speculating that Changing Star had gotten her first place by mistake. Castor was powerful, skilled, and charming. He was also humble and had an amiable personality that made it hard for anyone not to like him. His background was impeccable, and his future was unquestionably bright. Basically, he was the polar opposite of Sonny. Damn! I knew that voice sounded familiar. Sonny turned his head and stared at the handsome young man in utter bewilderment. What was that guy doing here? The two sleepers who didn't even know how close they had come to tasting the sharp edge of the Midnight Shard were doing the same. There was no more excitement on their faces. Oh. It's you. That was my line. Castor looked at them with a silent smile. There was no apparent hostility in his eyes, but for some reason, Gunlog's men seemed to lose their desire to stir trouble. After glancing at each other, one of them said in a hesitant tone, You know this guy, Castor? He gave them a nod. Yeah. We were in the academy together. Don't mind his rude behavior, guys, that's just how he is. Rough around the edges, but really nice once you get to know him well. Since when do we know each other? Sonny was irrationally angry at that statement, but forced himself to keep his mouth shut. He understood that Castor was just trying to defuse the situation. Actually, his arrival had been very timely. Sonny was sure of his ability to dispatch a couple of thugs, but what would happen next? He doubted that other members of Gunlog's host would just sit and watch. Becoming involved in a conflict with the masters of the castle on his first day here would have been less than ideal. The thugs in question, meanwhile, had given up. Trying to keep the appearance of being in control, they glared at Castor darkly and backed down. Teach your friend some manners, Castor. Next time we won't be so lenient. With that, they turned around and retreated back to their seats, throwing menacing looks at anyone who dared to stare at them. Soon, the grand hall was once again filled with the hum of voices. Castor followed them with his eyes and then turned to Sonny, his smile becoming a little somber. That wasn't a very smart thing to do, my friend. Sonny scoffed. Yeah, well, who says that I'm smart? Wait, no, that didn't come out right. The tall young man stared at him for a few seconds and then sighed. In any case, it is very nice to see you. Both of you. With that, he sat down, as though somebody had invited him. Well, admittedly, there was some connection between them. Wishing to talk to people with whom you had attended academy was sort of understandable. Still, Sonny didn't like it. Throwing a quick glance at Cassie, he smiled coldly and said, What? Are you very shocked to see us alive? Castor hesitated. It is good that you managed to survive. It seemed that this was his way of admitting that yes, he was surprised, but in a pleasant way. It wasn't a secret that Sonny and Cassie had been seen as two walking corpses by all the other sleepers in the academy. Just like Nephites and Castor occupied the top two positions in the rankings, they were dead last. Because of that, the two of them had been shunned and ostracized. Of course, when it came to Sonny, he not only welcomed the cold treatment of his peers, but had actually been the one to engineer it. In any case, no one had wanted to be around them, as though afraid of becoming infected by the invisible aura of death that followed them wherever they went. Sonny himself had been guilty of avoiding Cassie as much as he could in the past. It must have been very strange to see the two of them alive and well after months spent among the horrors of the Forgotten Shore. Cassie smiled. "Thank you?" Castor reciprocated her smile and asked, his tone strangely warm. "You are Kasha, right? And you are, Sunless?" Sonny gave him a curt nod. "Right. Although I'm surprised that you remember our names. Don't think that we've forgotten how you guys used to treat us." Cassie squeezed his hand and said in a disapproving tone. "Sonny!" Castor chuckled. No. He's right. We behaved like a bunch of jerks. Looking back, there were a lot of things we did wrong. If only we had known better. His voice trailed off, and after being silent for some time, the handsome young man suddenly smiled with nostalgia. "But still, those days in the academy were not all bad, right? I still remember the first time I met you, Sunless. You made quite an impression. All those tall tales, spitting in the faces of awakened tyrants, slaying sword saints with a shake of a finger." He chuckled, remembering the good old days. Sonny grinned. He was in the mood for some mischief. "What, that trivial stuff? Ha! Child's games. You should have seen the things I've done in the labyrinth. Now that's something to brag about." Castor looked at him with humorous sparks dancing in his eyes. "Oh? Well, do tell. What else have you done?" Sonny shrugged with profuse indifference. "This and that. Let's see." He pretended to think for a few moments, and then said in a bored tone, "I guess the most incredible thing I've done was killing a great devil with just one strike of my sword. Finished him right off, no problem at all. I even got a memory from that kill. But before you ask, no, I can't show it to you. Because, go right. I ate it.